talk about the youth and the teachers and the education. I have 3 children here in Easton, 14, 12, and 10, and my middle one right now is going through one of those growth phases where his mind is just snapping with questions, probably after he comes from class attending here at the sheep pasture. But I can pick him up at school, and I'll get this pelting barrage of questions, wanting to know how a satellite works, and what about that optic nerves that takes pictures, and how does that work, and how does it see visions inside our brain, and why is it that humans can't lift their elbows, and on one hand, I try as best as I can, that I'm so excited for him, that these gears in his brain are just starting to click and move and think about the world that he lives in. But as a mom, I'm kind of embarrassed because I should know these answers. Maybe I did know these answers at one point, but I don't have them. So I do what we moms do best. We try to play it off as smooth as I can. Like, that's a great question. I love that. What did your teacher say about that? Oh, your dad loves this topic. Let's talk to him at home, okay? As an adult, it's hard to understand sometimes how to behave when you don't know the right answers, what to tell the young ones. And recently, I was at an engagement, and I was around a bunch of adults, and I saw some of this same kind of faux acknowledgement behavior among the adults. And it was a gathering, and we started talking about the 50th anniversary of Silent Spring, written by Rachel Carson. And here the group, sure, yeah, that great book. And I realized none of them actually said that they had actually read the book. As I'm observing their behavior, we all had this sense that we should have read it, and that it has had an incredible impact on our culture and our environment. So I'm here to say that I, Christy Marsh, admit that after over 3.5 decades on this planet Earth, I had not read Silent Spring at the time. So I picked up the book, and I started to think, what would it have been like to read Silent Spring back in 1962 when it was initially published? Yes, there's me pondering over the book in 1962. After all, it was a different time. We had just spent several decades infusing our science and our knowledge and creating powerful synthetic chemicals that we were infusing into our farmlands and our food systems, creating great products, making life easier and better for our homes and our families. We were using these synthetic chemicals to control things, control nature, as Rachel wrote about, control the spruce budworm, the fire ants, and the sagebrush back in the Rocky Mountain states. It was a time of scientific amazement, advancement. We were proud. To speak out against it would have been simply unpatriotic. Now, in our mind here, I could understand that if we decided to take a synthetic chemical and design it so that it would attack maybe the nervous system of a pest, so we can eradicate that pest, that we might simply question ourselves, say, maybe that wouldn't affect just the creature itself, but maybe our waterways, or our soil, our air, or the predators that eat that same animal, maybe it would move up. We can question those things. We're accepting to the idea. But back then, this type of thinking was not the prevailing thought 50 years ago. So Silent Spring was a little bit avant-garde for the times. And the more I read this scientist with this beautiful poetic writing she had, I wondered what it would have been like to invite her over for dinner, to sit and have an arugula salad and ask her these questions about what she had learned about the plight of the robin and the elm trees and everything that she shared in Silent Spring. What would it have been like to have insight on these thoughts when the terms like pollution and eco, environment, and green goddesses, they weren't even existing yet? Maybe we would have topped off our meal and poured ourselves a cup of tea and moved to a fireplace and continued our conversation. I definitely would have asked her, what was it like to speak out as a writer? Not just a writer, but as a woman in the 1960s against these monolithic industries. I can't even imagine. No doubt, though, I would have sat in stunned silence as she would have shared with me how these same large companies, these chemical manufacturers, actually ran ads telling Americans to ignore Silent Spring. This invitation to supper will never happen, though, as Rachel Carson lost her battle with breast cancer in 1964 at age 57. And even though Rachel passed, Silent Spring's influence carried forward, and a light started to spread across our nation. It was like a dawning. We had new knowledge. We had new questions. And our leaders, they had new questions too and concerns. And in the early 1970s, they passed the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act, both that are celebrating their 40th anniversary as well. Our leaders at the time started questioning this rapidly growing number of synthetic chemicals we were bringing into the marketplace. At that time, almost 600 new chemicals a year we were bringing out and putting into everyday common products of our homes. So they implemented some legislation called TSCA, which was a chemical inventory keeper. Now, once again, I'm going to admit to you humbly that I knew very little of these things. I was just barely a concept in the 1970s. My news sources were limited to a green frog who told me how hard it was to be green, and a little creature with a mustache called the Lorax. Although, as Dr. Seuss books go, I was much more partial to the character development in One Fish, Two Fish. As I continued to grow, so did Rachel Carson's influence, like a shadow reaching out across our land. And in the late 1970s, a carcinogen called PCB was banned. In the early 1980s, attention was turned to a hole up in the sky, forming in the ozone, which somehow, and much to my dismay, had something to do with my choice of hairspray. But now, as an adult, and as a mother, I see a shift in our questioning. Not only how our actions are affecting the world and the environment around us, but how they're directly affecting our health of ourselves and our family members. We know now that of carcinogens, not just in cigarettes, but of things like in our hair straighteners and our nail polish, or in those use once and throw away styrene coffee cups. We have growing concerns now about something called an endocrine disruptor. You may have heard things like BPA flashing across the news and alarms, because as it's used in all of our plastics around us, not all of them, but certain plastics and food, the lining of cans, bottles, water bottles, that these endocrine disruptors can go into our bodies and behave like hormones in our bodies and our children's bodies. This very week, in 2 days in California, did you know that they will be on the ballot is the right for the consumer to even know how their food was grown or created? We are fighting for that now. These are the types of questions that we are asking in our generation. So as I grew up, so did that chemical inventory system that I referred to from the 1970s. It now tops over 83,000 plus synthetic chemicals, in which very few have been tested for our long-term health. I feel as if in my lifetime, in my generation, that dawning that I spoke of has come to high noon of heat coming down on me. Instead of this emerging warm glow and energy, it's alarms and headlines and doom and gloom, and sometimes I just don't even know what to do as a mother. I feel like I'm the one full of questions now. How can I choose wiser about the products I bring into my home? How can I make responsible decisions for my family? Sometimes I can't find the right answers, and it can be tiring and frustrating to move on. But Rachel Carson also recognized this human emotion in us 50 years ago and offered consolation and said there is something infinitely healing in the repeated refrains of nature. The assurance that dawn comes after night and spring after winter. And that makes me think of that high heat humidity that we have in August when I can't barely stand it at all, and I just want to give up. And I think about those cool, crisp mornings of fall. And it makes me think of last week when we huddled as a family down in the basement pretending to watch a movie when our minds were really simply thinking of, can we get through tomorrow morning with these wicked, horrible winds coming through here? So could it be that the best is just yet to come? Could we, our generation, be this midpoint? 50 years coming? What's coming ahead of us? A transition to the real change still yet to come? If we are the midpoint, then the protectors of our land and our bodies, our backyard, our acreage here in Easton, our community, our protectors still are yet to grow up. Their minds are just awakening right now. And it's our jobs to encourage those little gears to start moving. And that's what the NOT does. Fostering this sense of personal responsibility and this relationship between our outdoors and our own quality of life. We all know that mothers with little preschoolers come here on the warmest first day of spring that they can to get outside from wintertime, and they go out and stand on that short little dock and point out little turtles and frogs and their heads reaching out for the warmth and the sun. And these little tiny pudgy hands walk around with their mamas and ask, why do we have so many bluebird houses? Where did the bees go in the wintertime? That's what the NOT does for these little gears, these little minds. And as a patron, as a board member, as a supporter, as a teacher, as a director, as a donator, as a visitor, we are all contributing to this. We make this possible. We make this happen. Did you know that more than 4,000 children come through here every year from the school systems, not just the Easton School District, but communities nearby? They learn about mapping, geography and geology and adaptations and habitats and insects. I want to say, do we have an adult class start up pretty soon?
We've talked about it.
It's a fabulous thing that we're providing for these little minds that come here. And if Rachel Carson wrote eloquently and passionately for the ecosystems and about birds and about the bees and the little lorax he stood adamantly up for the trees, then guess what? You are the protector of the NOT. And if you leave here today after we do some socializing and try recipes from the cookbook that's on sale, and you leave here today and you say, you know, I think I might pick up that Silent Spring and get yourself a copy and place it on your nightstand, then I think that would be wonderful. But if you would like a more current book that actually took place here in Easton, I have one I can recommend to you. But if you could leave here with just one question chanting in your mind, something that you ask yourself when you leave these doors or look outside, one question in your mind, and maybe every morning you wake up now through winter, and it's one that Rachel asked as well, and say, what if I had never seen this before? What if I knew I would never see it again? Maybe it's not the answers that we're supposed to be providing right now. Maybe it's our generation to be asking these questions.
Thank you so much.